A little over a year ago, Joel and I sat in this very room. We were able to share with joy and laughter the story of how we met. It was a story that we knew only we could tell because it was our experience. We knew it was a story that only God could have made happen. We sat here knowing that Joel was terminally ill. He only had a few months to live. And with intentionality, we just recorded a video of a memory to have on record. And I'm so grateful that we have that. Looking to today's video, my desire is to just get a faithful record of what happened in his last days. I think about some of the prayers that we prayed with our church in this room, prayers for healing, of course, but also prayers that God would be able to make what seems unbearable, bearable. Another prayer that we prayed was that we would be able to be together in our last days when Joel died, that he wouldn't have to die alone. And that prayer was answered. It was my privilege to be by his side. God gave me that gift. So in a way, I feel like it's my responsibility to share and give a faithful account. I also know how prone I am to forget. You see back in scripture, the splitting of the Red Sea and the miracle that was. And so if the Israelites can forget that, I just feel like if I can share God's kindness and his uniqueness to our situation, then maybe it can shed light and help my children in the future to wrestle through this story of what I would say is a beautiful picture of God's righteousness and kindness. Psalm 145:17 says, "The Lord is righteous in all of his ways, and he's kind in all of his works." Definitely the word all sticks out to me. And I can see it. I can see it clearly in all of the ways that he loved us, specifically in giving us what we needed for this journey to be bearable. In a recent interaction that I had with one of my children, though, my eyes were opened. I realized that I was trying to push on my kids this idea of God always being kind. And right now in life, that's so hard for them to see, partly because I believe that they haven't seen the righteousness and the kindness that God perfectly displayed on the cross through Jesus Christ. If you can wrestle with the cross, if you can go to the cross and be offended by it and see your need of the cross, then you can see the righteousness and kindness more clearly in your everyday life. And so that's my prayer with this video. That's my prayer for my kids, that in the future, they will be able to look back at my husband's last days. They'll be able to look back at their father's last days and be able to say confidently, the Lord is righteous in all of his ways and kind in all of his works. Joel's last days, as symbolic as it can be, began on Good Friday. His Facebook post said, "We will all see the King soon. I suspect for me, it will be very soon, starting hospice." That night, his father wheeled him into our church building for what we thought could be the last time to worship as a family and with our church family. That night, our focus was turned to Christ, to his sufferings on the cross, to just meditating on his willingness to die in our place. I remember meditating on Jesus's prayer in the garden when he said, "Father, if you can remove this cup from me, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." It was just the perfect example for that night and what we were going through that day. We got to end the night with the Lord's Supper. Seeing Joel so frail and weak, getting the opportunity to partake of the most spiritually nourishing meal possible was so memorable. Just thinking about how that was the last day he was going to take all of his medicines and just be done with them and lean into the Lord was a beautiful picture. The next day we woke up with energy and wanted to make it out to our land as a family. We knew it was probably going to be the last time we made it out there. It was funny because Owen had been dying for a metal detector. Joel had gotten it in the kids' mind that there were Civil War artifacts or possibly gold in our land somewhere. So we had made a plan for Joel's mom to go ahead of us and buy the metal detector and give it to Joel so he could give it to them as a present. It was just such a fun memory, sitting on the shed deck together as a family. The adults watching the kids dig with shovels and the metal detector, and they would just run up to us with rusty nails or barbed wire. It was just a fun day, a really lighthearted day. But as we pulled away, it was just us marveling again at the story of how God had provided that piece of land for us to purchase in the last days. There were so many tractor rides. There was the memory of Joel clearing the land. There was the memory of the kids getting to hunt with Joel and kill a deer. There was the memories of the last project between Joel and his father, getting to build the epic shed. We just, again, marveled at how God uniquely helped us in such a hard time. We kept saying that he was making the seemingly unbearable more bearable. The following day was Resurrection Day. We woke up not knowing if we were going to be able to gather for worship again. So I just kind of had the kids halfway ready and waited for Joel's cues. About 10 minutes before we would have had to leave, he looked at me and said, "Do you think my jacket will still fit me? Go grab it." So I went to the closet, grabbed his jacket, he put it on, and we loaded into the car. That was our last day of worship as a family with our church body. And I can say without a doubt, Joel didn't want to be any other place in the world than worshiping that day. He may have said that in Turkey with our teammates, with the Turkish church, worshiping would have been just as good. We came home to a holiday meal that our pastor's wife and a sweet lady had prepared. It was some of Joel's favorite foods. Just looking back at how that was our last holiday together as a family was amazing. It was also amazing to think of how the Lord had blessed us with time. Up until that point, we had had almost exactly a year back in America together as a family. Each holiday, each birthday, we got to make so much more intentional and memorable. The following days showed obvious signs of Joel's decline. It was him not being able to give no more board games played with the kids, no more Bibles to be made. But what I remember from those days was the example that he gave us of worship and leaning into the gospel. You couldn't walk in the room where he was at in our living room and not hear music playing. And what was playing was worship and hymns with deep truths about God. I remember him just having 4 different albums on his phone. They were all Sovereign Grace Together for the Gospel Live. And he would just sit there on the couch and listen. Every once in a while he would call me over and he would point on his phone to the name of the song, and then he would point to a piece of paper that he had where we were preparing his funeral service. And I just knew that that meant write the name of the song down. I want this to be sung at my funeral. I want you guys to worship. Every once in a while he would pick a Turkish hymn. These moments were where you could find us in almost puddles beside each other, just aching in our hearts, but so privileged for the journey that we got to have in serving overseas. We thought about what if we could just go back in front of that restaurant owner or that coffee shop worker, or have that neighbor over one more time, or talk to that struggling Christian in the church and just kind of shake them and say, Tanrı'nın ne istediğin olsun, kutsal kitap al ve oku, İsa yaşıyor ve tekrar gelecek. Just all of the gospel probes that we would want to say to them in our suffering, to get to Joel, to have Joel come to them in his weakness, to possibly dismantle some of the excuses that we had run across. excuses like, if something dangerous happens, you can just get on a plane and go back to America. Or if you get sick, you have money to go to the private hospital. You don't have to go to the government hospital like we do. Just the idea that we could go before them in our suffering and say, he is worthy. He's worthy of giving your life for, because he gave his life for you. And just the desire to be back in front of them in our weakness one last time was so apparent and talked about. Thursday was a really big day for Joel and for us as a family. He woke up and couldn't not try one last chemo combination. His doctor had been really great in saying, I like to treat patients till the very end, and letting them decide when they were done being treated. So when Joel had reached out to him to say, hey, we haven't tried this one, can I get set up for it? He said sure, and was right on board. So that day, my blessed mother-in-law and sister watched the kids for us while I got to take Joel to his last doctor's appointment. He posted on Facebook that day, sweet mom and sister watching the kids while we go to our last doctor's appointment ever. I remember wheeling him up to the chemo room, not expecting to get to go in. With COVID restrictions, he had to do all of his treatments up to this point by himself. Nobody could be in the room with him while he was getting the chemo. Nobody could walk into the radiation hospital. We always were just loading up in the car and dropping him off and then waiting. His father also got to take him to many appointments and just wait for him to come back out. So the nurse opened the door and I just looked at her and I said, could I please be with my husband? And surprisingly, she said, yes, the doctor had called ahead and arranged a room for Joel to be in for some privacy. You are more than welcome to come in. So for the first time, I got to walk into the cancer treatment section and was just overwhelmed with people and what they were going through with their suffering and their treatments. But what stuck out, of course, the most to me was just getting to see what my husband had to go through for the past 6 months or so. I saw the nurse in all of her gear with gloves on, and she took the poison and put it into my husband's port that was hopefully gonna kill the poison in his body that was taking over. And I got to hear my husband, as frail as he was, share with this nurse about how God had taken care of us, and he knew God would continue to take care of his family. We got home from the treatment, and there was actually a supporting pastor who had drove 13 hours to spend just a few hours in our home with Joel. And it was a neat picture because he was one of the very first supporting pastors that kind of really encouraged us to continue raising money and to get to Turkey. So that was just a really special visit for Joel. After that, we split up the kids. So we had always desired to have the kids in the home with us if it was peaceful enough for them. But things were just getting very intense, and we knew that Joel needed the space. And since he was set up in the living room, we decided to have a few of the kids go with my mom to our church's mission house, and then the other kids go with Joel's parents to an apartment. And so that was one of our first nights together as a couple to kind of war through the night and the symptoms of what he was having. One of the things that we were trying to decide on was what book to give away at Joel's funeral. We finally landed on Don't Waste Your Life by John Piper. And so I reached out to one of the contacts that I knew would be able to give me the information on how to get the books fast and who to reach out to order them from. I messaged him, and immediately he just said, send me your address, the books are on the way. I remember walking back over to the couch and explaining that to Joel, and he broke down and just was crying, and he said, because of Christ, all of my life wasn't a waste. Friday morning came, and neither Joel or I had any sleep or rest from his symptoms. He was having coughing spells every hour where he would cough for about 15 minutes, try to catch his breath, get dizzy, feel like he was going to pass out, get a little bit of relief for a few minutes, and then it just start over and over again. Everything was intense and just seemed like we wouldn't be able to do this on our own. I remember my brother-in-law showing up, and so it was just 5 adults in our house at one point, kind of managing the kids, but looking at Joel in his suffering and knowing that there was nothing that was helping. There was no medicine that we could give him. We couldn't take any of his pain from him. And it just felt like we were all as adults looking around wondering, is this really how it has to be? Is this really what the end's going to look like? That day didn't really calm down at all, it just kept intensifying. And the kids were split up again, and it just seemed like Joel and I were going to have to war through another night of those symptoms, not knowing really when we were going to get relief. About 7:30 that night, we got what I call was the miracle call. It was a hospice nurse that we had never talked to before, and she said, "I'm just calling to check in on you guys." And I timidly took my sheet of symptoms that I was keeping track of and how often the coughing spells were happening, and I explained them to her. And she just said, "Well, does that mean you guys haven't slept for over a day and things aren't getting any better? You're not more comfortable? The medicine isn't working out right?" And I said, "Yeah." And she just said, "Well, let me remind you, you guys are free to come in for the hospice center. You're free to come to the hospice center for a few days, and we can try to get those symptoms under control." And in my heart, I was just like, yes, this is what we need. But at the same time, I didn't want to put that pressure on my husband. And so I just calmly relayed the information to him to see what he would think. And he asked, "Are you able to come with me?" And I asked the nurse, and she said, "Yeah, you're able to go with him, stay with him 24/7. And you can even have visitors during the day." And so that's really all we needed to hear. We knew that we were in a situation that we needed help with. And so about an hour later, a transport ambulance came. We weren't sure if I was going to get to ride in the ambulance or not, but when they showed up, we just asked. We said, can we please ride together? And the lady immediately just said yes. And so they wheeled him into the back of the ambulance, and she buckled me in right beside him where she was supposed to be, and I was just able to ride holding his hand. That night is one of the most memorable nights of my life because there was a huge storm. If you know Joel, he loved everything about storms. He loved chasing them, he loved watching them, he loved being in the middle of them however he could. And just fond memories of us in our marriage, of doing all of those things together, watching the storm, chasing the storm, being in it together. And so we got to ride in an ambulance, kind of like being transported, just facing these huge ambulance windows. The doors would shut and the windows were just perfect for us to be able to see and watch. And on that ride, it was about a 20-minute ride, we just sat there, again, marveling at God's unique desire to give us such a special memory. We arrived at the hospice center, and I can say that if there was ever a time in my life where I felt like Jesus was intervening in the storm, was calming the storm, it was that moment. We entered, and all of the nurses were immediately trying to help provide comfort in whatever way we needed. They were helping get Joel's medicine and oxygen set up, and then they turned to me and asked me what I needed, and that was just such a relief and a weird but awesome rescue from the situation that we had just been in and feeling helpless. I remember walking into our room and there was no beeping like in a hospital. I remember this big brown recliner that I was able to wheel over to his bedside and push buttons so that I could be right beside him. And that, compared to the air mattress and couch situation that we had before, was better than a 5-star resort to me. We knew that we were exactly where we needed to be in a way that we could have never planned out before. Over the next few days, they worked at getting his medicine figured out. But what sticks out about those days were definitely the goodbyes that he got to have. My mom was able to come and see him face to face, and he was able to say goodbye to her, and she was able to be mom in that situation, and that was perfect and just what we needed. And then the kids were able to come and sit in that exact same brown recliner one by one, hold Joel's hand and just hear exhortations and I love you. I remember him saying, God is good, don't ever doubt it, don't love the world. All of those things that we have in our minds, but also we have on record for the kids to get to look back on and see. He also got to exhort and say he loved his parents one last time too. It was kind of set up where they would sit in a chair and he would look directly at them and just say everything that a son wishes to say to his parents. And I know everything that a parent would want to hear in that moment. It was beautiful. He also got a time with each of his sisters. Just timing of that couldn't have been planned out by us at all. Sisters arrived just at the end of the days when he didn't have hardly any strength left, but they would arrive and he would kind of sit up and try to gain strength to make sure that he was giving them, I think, exactly what they needed to hear before he died. After the goodbyes to family, Joel was pretty much worn out. He was just spent. You could tell that he had given so much in that situation. We knew that that was the last time that he was going to be seeing those people. And so I'm so blessed that he got to share like he did with them. But it was evident to me that it was time for the elders. And elders bring such a comfort just in their presence in hospital situations, but especially towards the end. I think it's such a picture of how they believe what they preach. They show up and they can just say with their presence that sickness can take the body, sickness can destroy this body, but it can't take your hope. It's very rare. I've never heard of a healing pastor coming and being at the bedside in those moments, but it's the faithful elders that show up. So the first elders to show up were our three pastors. It meant so much. It was a decade deep of brotherhood and friendship, and two of them had crossed the ocean to visit us when we first started serving. One of them, Joel loved enough to buy a house next to. So they showed up and came into the room, and emotionally, I just couldn't even be in the room with them because I knew it was their last time together. So I stepped out, and they said their last words and goodbyes, and it was a blessing. Two more elders and their wives showed up that day. At that point, I don't remember much, but just the comfort again of their presence. The last day was surprisingly peaceful. We actually fell asleep that night. We were woken up to the doctor coming in and saying that he had been in there a few hours before, but had seen us holding hands and asleep, and it was such a beautiful picture that he wasn't going to wake us up to check on Joel. One more elder was scheduled to come that day, and I hadn't known if Joel was going to make it through the night. So I went ahead and messaged him, and I said, I don't know how coherent he'll be, but your visit would be a blessing still. So a few hours later, this elder showed up, and when I told Joel who it was, Joel immediately tried in his weakness to sit up, and I knew at that moment that he could hear us and that any kind of encouragement we could give him would be helpful. So I sat there with that elder, and we just tried to pour into Joel as much as we could in those moments of last coherency. The elder was telling him, we're going to take care of your family. You don't need to worry about them. Finish strong. You're so close. I remember how Joel had wanted so badly to be at this conference, this Creeds and Confessions conference that this elder beside him was hosting a few days later. Just a flashback, Joel would ask me, Emily, do you think we can make it? Do you think we can make it to this place and be a part of this conference? And I would just say, yeah, let's see how you're doing. And he just loved to be in those services of learning and brotherhood. And so it was funny to me, or it made me smile as I was telling him, Joel, when you get there, you're going to know the creeds and the confessions better than all of these men that are trying to figure them out and stand strong on them. And so it was just a sweet memory of us pouring into them as much as we could at the end. When we felt like we had said all we could say, that elder got up to leave, and Joel feebly reached his arm and tried to pick up his phone. And I wasn't really understanding what he wanted, but finally we figured out that he was wanting me to take a picture of him and this brother. And so I reached up my phone and I just snapped that picture, and then getting ready to say goodbye, but then he reached his hand up again, and we figured out that he wanted to get one last picture with me too. And so that was the last interaction that I had with Joel. As the elder was getting ready to tell Joel bye, just in one last push and stretch of his strength, he tried to stand up. And I just remember we were pretty much trying to like wrestle him back down to the bed, and the elder saying, no, Joel, don't worry. I know you love me. Like, stay, you don't have to get up. And it was just such a beautiful sign of that last push to let a brother know, like, thank you. Throughout that day, I got to just see Joel relax and be comforted more. They were able to finally get him to lean back in his hospice bed. And for some reason, seeing him get to lean back and get that relief was relieving to me. I think that we had just pictured him as a family for the past months, like trying to hold his body up because his brain wouldn't let him lean back, even though his lungs and his body felt like they should. And so just getting to see that little bit of relief, little by little, him leaning back more and more, was just a picture of what I wanted for my husband. I wanted him to not have that struggle of trying to hold himself up anymore. And so over the course of the day, the doctor would come in and just wisely ask me, what do you see happening? How does he look to you? Kind of in a way to prepare myself and just make sure that I was saying out loud what was about to happen. And he would say, yeah, you're right. He's getting close. It could be tonight, but we're not sure. And so I just obviously started preparing myself for what could be our last final night, our last final hours. I didn't really know. We had the lights kind of dim in the room, and so I sent one last message on my phone to the elder's wife that had just visited, saying, thank you for sharing your husband. That was a huge blessing. Would you please pray for me? I think this is it. I opened my Bible and I positioned myself in a way that I could still look at him and see his chest. At that moment, he was just taking deeper and deeper breaths in and out, and they were becoming further and further apart. So I had my Bible open, we were hand in hand, and I started reading from the book of Revelation. And within minutes of that, I noticed a difference in his breathing. And so I just kept my Bible in a way that I could keep reading, and I was watching his chest, and then finally his chest didn't come back up. I honestly didn't know what to do at that point besides just keep reading. So I kept reading just a few more verses, and then a nurse came in. She had no idea what had just happened, but she just quietly walked over and said, I'm just coming to check on him. And I said, he's gone. And she came, just checked, no words, and then just said, I'll give you some time. So I sat there in those moments, realizing that was the last time God had given me the chance to read my husband to sleep. I realized that those were the last prayers I would ever get to pray for my husband, and I praised the Lord for his faithfulness in leading him all the way home.